Okay, so I found this lesson plan on iteslj.org. I'm not really sure what it's called. I think it's the Internet TESL Journal Archives. I think that's what that's short for. But I've done this lesson before, so I thought it would be a good idea to take my own experience and put it into this lesson plan and see what can change and what's a good thing about this lesson plan. Basically, this one is about prepositions and how to address the right preposition use. I know me personally, sometimes I say I'm at such and such street, or I'm waiting at my house or something, But this chart can help even English speakers like me who mess up teach ESL learners how to properly use prepositions. Basically, this lesson shows this chart used from the University Grammar of English, which is presented on the diagram. You're supposed to provide the students the diagram as a sheet of paper and explain give an explanation regarding the meaning of the prepositions. So on means on top of, at means in that or at the location, but not sitting there. So it's kind of temporary. And in means within or inside. It's hard to explain without the diagram because the words, definitions are within themselves. So I think the chart is a very good use. They give certain examples of how you can say teach the prepositions in place and direction. So I'll meet you at the bus stop on Main Street. The tickets will be in an envelope on my desk. The bus stopped at the traffic light. So it says give directions, but it also doesn't say to go into depth about explaining these sentences. So when they see a sentence like I'll meet you at the bus stop, the teacher should explain at the bus stop means that that's the location at, which is a temporary place, but it's also that's where you will be standing. And the bus stop on Main Street, so the bus stop resides on Main Street. It sits there forever. And so the at doesn't refer to the bus stop, but it refers to you yourself, which you'll temporarily be at the bus stop on Main Street to meet them. They also need to explain the tickets will be in the envelope on my desk, and the other example, as well as giving more examples. They only list 3, and I think if you have a lesson plan, it's just a guideline, so there should be more examples. But personally, when I make a lesson plan, I like to put as many examples as possible, just so like if I have a blank during executing the lesson plan, or if a student gives an example, I write that example down and maybe use it for the next class when we review or something like that. That's not on there. But these are just methods of teaching, so I don't think that this refers to the lesson plan in itself. It also says that when working on references to time, to use the diagram, for I'm sorry, I'm blanking. You already explained time, so you've already explained places, which is space, because prepositions refer to space in time, so they want you to explain more in detail of time, and they want you to bring in a calendar, which has slots for hourly appointments. I also think that you need to bring another, 3 different types of calendars. Pull it up on your computer or whatever you have to do to show hourly, monthly, or weekly, monthly and yearly, or weekly, monthly. Yeah, hourly, weekly, and monthly. So the students can refer to one being within another. You can also go as far as to talk about minutes within seconds and things like that. But if it's a level 1 or level 2 class and they're learning prepositions, then I would say to just start with month, week, and time, as those are probably going to be the most used. So they explain certain things as a year is space, and so is a month or a week. But they should also show dates within the time and all these things, like the example, the hour, to say the hour would be a point on the day line and thus require at, as it is at 6 a.m. and at 6:30, which meaning that at is temporary, referring to the time and not an exact point, because 6:30 within that day, within that month, within that year is a temporary time, and it is only 6:30 for 60 seconds. So you can say at 6:30 instead of in 6:30 or on 6:30. You can also explain certain things like 6:30 on the dot, which means you can say on there because it refers to the dot, which means exactly or promptly at 6:30. So permanently at 6:30, because that time doesn't change. Then you come into the actual activity. I think the teaching portion, the teacher should also draw the chart on a board and then put examples within, as well as the diagram that they have, which is great, which shows a little bullet to show you where these things are located. But I think on the side they need to put the examples that the teacher shows. Also ask the students for certain examples within your lecture so the students feel more involved and they're practicing their language. But the practice for the actual activity says to tell the students to walk around the class and find out exactly when people were born and see if they can find someone who was born in the same year, the same month, or perhaps on the same day. I think this is very important because we're talking about time and space, but I also think that we need to work on locations like cities and countries also. So you should incorporate that into the lesson, and then the next portion is for them to report those who they've interviewed when that person was born. We also hit the final point of the lesson or the activity, which is to provide a fill-in exercise or a closed passage, which makes references. This part right here makes references to the dates. You can use an incident such as the Titanic on the night it sank or things like that. Personally, I think that it's a little advanced. I think that the lesson moves kind of fast in the way that the lecture, and then they immediately start talking to the classmates. I think that there needs to be more practice within the community of the classroom, so those who are comfortable speaking speak, and those who are not comfortable are prompted to ask questions, because when you go off to interview, sometimes, especially in personal experience, you just ask somebody to write down their answer and you don't actually converse. I know the ESL teacher is responsible for making sure that people talk amongst each other, but most likely the students are more comfortable talking to the teacher. So I think that they need to create a more broad classroom incorporated activity and then separate into smaller groups. Also, I think that as important it is to understand and have that cognitive information of what a preposition is, there also needs to be some form of writing practice. I understand that this is just one activity, but for me, as a lesson plan in general, I think that an activity can incorporate multiple things. So I think they need to be writing these things down, and giving more examples. And I think that the activity needs to be more complex and not just year, but also where they were born. I also think that something this broad is kind of narrow. So I think I think that something like this practice is a little more two on the dot, like first day of school type lesson. I think that the teacher needs to give them a certain prompt after this. So born, there needs to be different questions other than just this, because this is just one way of applying it. So they need to ask, what did you do this weekend? Or something, certain questions to give a certain time period or a spatial period. What do you get when you go to the store? What aisles, or where do you go when you go to the store? Things like that, without the preposition in that sentence. So they're prompted to tell a fuller sentence when they respond. The activity seems pretty short. It doesn't say how long it is or how long it's going to take. This thing is only associated with time. So the notes that I had on space may have already been addressed in a previous activity, but I think it's important to incorporate both at the same time instead of just time. So if you've already discussed space, then that's fine. You can go on and address time, but I think one should only follow the other. It's hard to talk about time before you talk about space. It's easier to talk about space before you talk about time. Or maybe at the same time. I think maybe this should be edited to talk about prepositions in general, as it's a general understanding, because it does talk about, they've already explained in the teaching, in the lecture, that the prepositions are in a certain place and direction, so they've already addressed it. So I think that we should use more of space in the practice. These are my edits and adaptations to this lesson plan. I hope I got my point across, and I hope that was a good enough explanation of what I have a conception for as an activity. I like to broaden my activities to a whole lesson. So if we move on to another grammar point within the class, I still like to incorporate it. So I think an activity is ongoing for the entire class period. That's the way that I like to teach, so that the students aren't just learning something and then going on to something immediately. So thank you.